He stood at the altar, holding her hands, my sister's hands, smiling, believing I was dead. And the worst part? It was my own family who told him that lie. A coffin lowered into the ground with my name on it. A funeral filled with tears, whispered prayers, and a photograph framed in black ribbon. Friends, neighbors, even the pastor spoke of me in the past tense. They buried me alive with nothing more than a signature on a death certificate, and they walked away as if I had never existed. But that wasn't the end, because as they celebrated a wedding built on betrayal, I was very much alive, watching from the shadows, piecing together the cruelest truth I had ever known. How does love become a weapon? How does family turn into the very enemy you never imagined? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Emily, and until that day, I believed I was living the kind of life most people pray for. I had a man who loved me deeply, who promised me forever beneath the stars on a summer night. I had a family who seemed unshakable, a mother who reminded me of warmth itself, and a father who never let me forget I was his little girl. And then there was Anna, my younger sister, the one everyone described as perfect, beautiful, charming, the one who could walk into a room and instantly own it. I admired her more than I ever admitted, and maybe that was the beginning of it all. Because in my family, perfection wasn't just noticed, it was rewarded. What I didn't see then were the cracks, the quiet comparisons, the subtle ways my worth was measured against hers, the way my choices were second-guessed, while hers were celebrated, the way love in our home didn't always feel unconditional, but conditional, fragile, like something that could be given or taken away. That is what made the betrayal so much heavier. This wasn't just about losing the man I loved. It was about losing the belief that blood, loyalty, and trust meant anything at all. And as I look back now, I wonder, were the signs always there? Did I ignore the small moments of envy, the whispers of favoritism, because I so desperately wanted to believe my family was unbreakable? I still remember the first time I met Daniel. It wasn't some grand, unforgettable moment. It was ordinary. The kind of day you don't expect will change your life. He held the door open for me at a coffee shop, and something about the way he smiled, genuine, unhurried, made me pause. Over time, that small encounter turned into conversations, those conversations into late-night phone calls, and before I knew it, he was woven into every part of my life. We weren't perfect, but that's what made it real. We faced bills we struggled to pay, nights where our dreams felt out of reach, and moments where arguments left both of us in tears. But somehow, through all of it, we chose each other. That was our strength. We didn't give up when things got hard. And with every obstacle, our love only grew stronger, a kind of bond that felt unshakable, like it could weather any storm. At least that's what I believed. Yet from the very beginning I could sense my family's hesitation. They never said it outright, but the signs were there. My father would ask if Daniel was truly ambitious enough, as though stability and kindness weren't worth as much as wealth and status. My mother would smile politely at him, but later whisper that maybe I should keep my options open. And Anna, my sister, she would laugh a little too loudly at his small mistakes, her words coated in sweetness but edged with condescension. "He's nice," she'd say, "but don't you think you could do better?" Each comment felt like a scratch across the surface of something I was trying to protect, but I told myself they didn't mean harm. After all, families question, they worry. That's what love looks like, or so I convinced myself. Still, I tried harder. I bent over backward to prove to them that Daniel was worthy, that we were worthy. When I was offered a job in another state, I turned it down because moving away would mean leaving my family behind, and I wanted their approval too much to risk it. When Daniel worked long hours, I picked up the slack, cooking dinners, running errands, showing up at family gatherings alone just so they wouldn't say he was neglecting me. I gave them my time, my energy, my loyalty, sacrifices they never even noticed, or worse, expected without thanks. And every time I defended him, every time I chose him in their presence, I thought I was protecting my love. But in truth, I was feeding into their quiet disapproval, allowing them to believe that their opinions mattered more than my own happiness. Still, I clung to hope. There were dinners where everyone laughed, holidays where Daniel joined us, and for a moment it felt like we belonged. Smiles were exchanged, toasts were made, and I let myself believe the worst was behind us. I told myself that time would prove his worth, that eventually they'd see what I saw, a man who loved me with every part of himself, even when it wasn't easy. But I was wrong, because behind those smiles, behind the forced laughter and polite gestures, my family was already plotting something I never could have imagined. A plan that would rip apart not just my relationship, but my very sense of identity. And the cruelest part? They carried it out not with anger, but with a calm certainty, as if they truly believed they were entitled to decide the course of my life. It started small, so small I almost convinced myself it didn't matter. Anna would linger too long in conversations with Daniel, her laughter softer, her touches more casual than they needed to be. At first, I told myself it was just her way. She had always been the charming one, the one who drew people in without trying. But sometimes I caught the flicker in her eyes when she looked at him, not as a sister admiring her sibling's partner, but as a woman wanting what wasn't hers, and my family, instead of correcting it, seemed to encourage her. My mother would say things like, "Anna just has a way of connecting with people, don't be so sensitive." And my father would compare their conversations with mine, always favoring hers. Each word chipped away at me, quietly, slowly, until I began to question if I was the one imagining it all. But the truth became harder to ignore. Subtle lies began to surface, plans that Daniel swore he never heard about, messages I had sent that he claimed never reached him. I would wait for him at dinners we'd agreed to attend, only to learn later that Anna had told him I canceled. I would call, only to find his phone mysteriously off, while my sister somehow always knew where he had been. These weren't coincidences. They were choices. And each time my family wrapped their arms around her, praising her for being so supportive, while treating me like the unstable one, too emotional, too dramatic. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, the walls closing in, conversations cut short the moment I walked into the room. And then came the distance from Daniel himself, a distance I couldn't explain. The warmth in his voice became hesitant, the way he held my hand no longer steady, but uncertain. He started arriving late, offering excuses that didn't quite add up. He laughed less with me and more with others, and when I asked if something was wrong, he assured me everything was fine. But I could feel it, the silence between his words, the weight in his eyes. Something was shifting, something slipping away, and no matter how tightly I held on, it was as if the ground beneath us was already giving way. Still, I clung to the belief that love was enough, that our history and sacrifices would hold us together. But then, one evening, while searching for something in Daniel's study, I stumbled upon a detail that made my blood run cold. Letters, notes, reminders. Things meant for him. Hidden, tucked away where I was never supposed to find them. Proof that messages, words of love, even plans for our future, had been intercepted, redirected, kept from him. Someone had been making sure he never truly heard my voice. And in that moment, I realized the cruelest truth. It wasn't Daniel pulling away from me. It was someone pulling him away. It should have been just a brief absence, nothing more. A short trip out of town to care for an aunt who had fallen ill. A simple family duty I never questioned. I packed my bags believing I'd return to the same life I had left behind, to the man who loved me and the family who claimed to care for me. But distance was all they needed, In the space of a few days, my world was rewritten without my permission. While I sat at my aunt's bedside, answering her quiet questions and holding her fragile hands, my family began to erase me. They told Daniel I was gone, dead. A tragic accident, they said. A sudden collapse no one could have prevented. They even claimed I never made it to my destination. My life, reduced to a story they told in whispers, crafted with precision, and delivered with the certainty of people who knew no one would dare question them. They didn't stop at words. They went further, ensuring their lies carried the weight of truth. A forged hospital record appeared, stamped and signed as though death could be neatly documented on a single page. An obituary was published in the local paper, my name in black ink surrounded by phrases like, "beloved daughter," and "taken too soon." Neighbors stopped by my parents' home with casseroles and condolences, offering prayers for my soul. And while strangers mourned a woman they thought was gone, I was very much alive, breathing, unaware that a coffin had been lowered into the earth with my name engraved upon the plaque. The cruelest part of it all was Daniel. My fiancé, the man who once promised he would never let me go, stood at a graveside, believing he had lost me forever. I later learned of the way he wept, shoulders shaking, his voice breaking as he whispered words he thought I could no longer hear. He held onto the photograph we'd taken on our last anniversary, clutching it so tightly the frame cracked in his hands. Friends placed a hand on his shoulder. My family stood beside him offering comfort, and all the while they knew. They knew I was alive. They knew this grief was built on their lies. And when I finally tried to call him, desperate to hear his voice, to tell him I was coming home, he didn't answer. Call after call went unanswered. I sent messages, letters, desperate attempts to reach through the silence, but there was nothing. To him, I was already gone, another name carved into stone. He thought I was buried beneath the earth, thought the woman he loved had vanished forever. And I realized then, with a kind of horror that still leaves me breathless, that I hadn't just been betrayed. I had been erased. In the weeks that followed my so-called death, Daniel was a broken man. I've since heard the stories, how he would sit for hours in the park where we used to walk, staring at the bench where I once leaned against his shoulder, how he left my side of the bed untouched, the sheets neatly folded as if waiting for me to return. But grief is a heavy burden, and my family knew exactly how to twist it into something else. They told him I would never want him to be alone. They whispered that I had loved him too much to let his life stop with mine. "She would have wanted you to move on," my mother told him, her hand on his arm, her voice steady as though she were speaking the truth. And my father reminded him that life was too short to waste in sorrow. "You need someone to take care of you," he said. Words meant to soothe but planted like seeds, reshaping his mourning into something else entirely. And who was always there, waiting in the shadows of his grief? Anna, my sister. She became the shoulder he leaned on, the hand that reached for his when the silence grew too heavy. At first it was small, dropping by with meals, offering him comfort when the weight of loneliness became too much. She painted herself as the only person who truly understood his pain, the only one who could help him heal. And in his brokenness, he let her in. Each conversation blurred the lines a little more, until the memory of me was no longer the anchor keeping him from moving forward, but the excuse they used to push him closer to her. The engagement didn't happen in the open. It wasn't something they announced with joy or celebration. No, it was arranged in secrecy, whispered agreements behind closed doors. My family framed it as an act of mercy, as though they were giving Daniel back a future by offering him my sister's hand. By the time the news trickled out, it was too late. The man who once swore he would wait for me until the end of his days was preparing to vow the same promises to the very person who should have been mourning beside him, not replacing me. And that's how my fiancé ended up walking down the aisle with my sister. That's how the life I built, the love I fought for, was stolen from me while I was still breathing. A betrayal so complete that even now I ask myself, was this about love, or was it always about power? When I finally returned home, I expected open arms, laughter, relief that I had come back. Instead, I was met with confusion, silence, and doors that no longer opened to me. At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel misunderstanding, that perhaps my family had panicked, exaggerated something in my absence. But the truth settled in quickly, cold and undeniable. Daniel wasn't answering because he truly believed I was gone. My calls were silenced, my messages intercepted. Each attempt to reach him ended the same way: emptiness. And when I confronted my family, their eyes betrayed nothing but carefully rehearsed calm. "You must be tired," they said. "You're imagining things." As though I were the one who had lost my grip on reality, as though grief belonged to them and not to me. But reality has a way of bleeding through the cracks no matter how tightly it's sealed. Whispers floated through the town, half-formed rumors I wasn't supposed to hear. A neighbor stopped me on the street, her eyes wide with shock, asking how I could possibly be here when she had attended my funeral. Another slipped, mentioning preparations for a wedding that wasn't mine. At first, I thought it was gossip gone wrong, but then I saw it with my own eyes. A small envelope left carelessly on my parents' kitchen counter, a wedding invitation embossed in gold. My name nowhere on it. Instead, it bore Daniel's and Anna's. My chest tightened as I traced the letters, my own handwriting remembered from the vows I once drafted for the man I loved. My hands shook as I stared at proof that my entire life had been replaced in ink and paper. And then came the photographs. A friend, unaware of the deception, showed me glimpses captured on her phone. Daniel and Anna together, walking side by side, her hand looped into his as though it had always belonged there. Smiles that once belonged to me now rested on her face. Every image was a dagger, cutting through the hope I had clung to in silence. It wasn't a nightmare, it wasn't confusion, it was reality. Piece by piece, I gathered the fragments of a truth I was never meant to discover. When the truth became too heavy to bear in silence, I confronted them. I walked into my parents' house with the wedding invitation in my hands, my voice shaking with rage, demanding answers. At first they tried to dismiss me, to wave it off as though I were delusional. But when my anger boiled over, when my screams echoed against the walls that once sheltered my childhood, the mask began to slip. My father raised his voice, insisting I was selfish, that my return would undo everything they had worked to secure. My mother wept, but her tears were not for me. They were for the disruption I represented. And then came Anna. She stood across from me, her eyes steady, her words colder than I ever imagined they could be. "He was supposed to be mine all along," she said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. My heart nearly stopped at the sound of it. I shouted back, reminding her of every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had chosen love, even when it cost me. But my words didn't pierce her. Instead, she smiled, a small, bitter curve of her lips that told me she had already won. And my parents, instead of condemning her betrayal, twisted the knife even deeper. "You should let go," my father said, his tone sharp with authority. "You'll ruin his life if you come back." My mother's voice followed, trembling but unyielding. "He has healed, Emily. Don't drag him back into pain. Sometimes love means letting go." Their morality had been reshaped to suit their lies, and in their version of truth, I was the selfish one for daring to exist when they had already buried me. In that moment, I realized I was standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything. Do I expose the truth? Risk shattering Daniel's fragile sense of healing and tearing apart the family that had stolen my very life? Or do I stay silent, living as a ghost in the shadows, watching the man I love vow his forever to my sister? And I have to ask you, what would you have done if you were me? Would you speak, even if it destroyed everyone around you, or would you swallow the truth, letting the lie live on while you disappeared once more? The day of the wedding arrived, and I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I walked into that church, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every whispered prayer and hushed conversation. The guests turned first, gasps rippling through the room as though they had seen a ghost. And in a way, they had. Their eyes widened, their hands rose to their mouths, because I was supposed to be buried beneath the earth, not standing at the back of the aisle. Daniel turned, his face pale, his hands trembling as they slipped from Anna's grasp. For a moment, he didn't move. He simply stared at me, confusion and disbelief warring across his features. The woman he had mourned, the love he had buried, was alive and breathing before him. The silence shattered as questions erupted, voices overlapping in chaos. Guests demanded answers, murmurs turned into shouts, and all eyes swung toward my family. Anna tried to hold her ground, her voice trembling as she insisted it was all a mistake, that I had abandoned him, that she was only stepping in where I had failed. But lies crumble when the truth is standing in the flesh. Each denial unraveled under the weight of reality, and the cracks spread quickly. My parents tried to silence me, begging me to walk away before more damage was done, but it was too late. Daniel's gaze shifted between us, horror dawning as he realized the depth of the betrayal. In that church, everything fell apart. My family's reputation splintered, the sister who once basked in admiration reduced to desperate excuses, and Daniel, his face, I will never forget it. His grief transformed into something even heavier, a devastation that stole the air from his lungs. He whispered only once, his voice breaking in front of everyone. The woman I mourned was alive, and the family I trusted destroyed me. And in that moment, the life we had all pretended to hold together collapsed into ruins. After the chaos of that day, silence became louder than any scream. Daniel broke down, not in front of the crowd, but later, when the walls could no longer hold the weight of his grief. His anger at my family was fierce, raw, and undeniable. He demanded answers that never came, condemned the lies that had stolen years from us, and cursed the trust he had placed in people who betrayed us both. But beneath his rage was something heavier, guilt. Guilt that he had mourned me too quickly, that he had let himself be comforted by the very person who had helped destroy us. He asked me if I could ever understand, if I could see that his heart had been manipulated as much as mine. And though I wanted to hold him, to erase the pain, I realized in that moment that love could not survive such devastation. What we had was real, but it had been shattered beyond repair. Anna, once the golden child, became the shadow of her own ambition. Neighbors turned their backs, whispers followed her everywhere, and the admiration she had always craved curdled into disdain. My parents, too, fractured under the weight of their choices. Their attempts to justify the unforgivable only deepened the divide, and what had once been a family home became a battleground of silence and unspoken blame. I stood in the center of it all, carrying the truth that no amount of apologies or excuses could rebuild what they had destroyed. And for the first time, I realized that clinging to them, to Daniel, to the version of life I thought I needed, was the very thing keeping me from healing. So I chose myself. I walked away, not out of bitterness, but out of a quiet understanding that survival sometimes means letting go. My love story was rewritten by betrayal, my family broken by lies, but my life was still my own, and maybe that was the only piece worth saving. But I leave you with this question: did I forgive them in time, or did I walk away for good? They buried me in lies before I was ever gone. They lowered me into a grave of deception, sealed my name beneath stone and silence, and expected me to remain there. But I refused to stay in that grave. I rose from the life they tried to steal, and though I carried scars, I also carried something stronger, myself. Betrayal may have stolen my family, may have shattered the man I loved, but it could not take away my worth. In the ashes of what they destroyed, I found a kind of freedom I never thought I would need, the freedom to choose my own story, to rebuild without permission, to walk forward unchained. This was not just the end of a love story or the collapse of a family. It was the rebirth of a woman who learned that survival is not just about breathing, but about refusing to let lies define you. And now I ask you, if the people you trusted most betrayed you like this, would you ever forgive them? Or would you walk away, carrying only yourself into the next chapter of your life? If this story shook you, hit like and subscribe for more stories that remind us how fragile and powerful trust really is.